Welcome everybody. My name is Onel Starkey and I am a fertility awareness educator, intern. And I am really excited to share with you guys tonight about fertility awareness and how it's been a beautiful path for me in my life, and to teach you more about it so it can be one in your life as well. So, as a little orientation, y'all know where the bathroom is. You're well glad you have water. Keep your be good to yourself throughout it all, and I will too. If you're hungry, eat, which looks like you all are doing. And we're gonna have some breaks throughout as we need them. But if you need to excuse yourself, that is fine too. So, what I am really excited about sharing this information because I actually think that the more women and their partner, well actually all people, but particularly women, have this information about their bodies, the more, the better we can take care of ourselves, the better we can learn to listen and share our experiences with our partners and our families, and it just sort of raises the consciousness of what we expect from our partners as well as from our healthcare providers, and the more we know about ourselves, the more we can ask the people around us to support us in that knowing. So I'd like to start with you guys going around the circle, saying your name, first name, and what if you have any experience with charting or fertility awareness, and essentially what you're looking for in this class, if there's something in particular, or if you're just here for a general overview too. So, who wants to go first in this big circle of women?
I'll go first. I'm Heather. I haven't really done much charting or fertility awareness. I just try to write down when I start bleeding each month, but it's been something I've been wanting to pay more attention to for a while, and now that I'm in a new relationship, it just feels really important, so that I can be wise about when and how we have sex, and I just want to just be more in touch with my body. And in a few years I want to have kids, so it seems like it would be just a good skill to develop.
Thank you.
My name is Lindsay, and I have kind of done charting, but I didn't really know what I was doing or what certain things meant, like what cervical fluid meant when it was one thing or another, or what certain temperatures meant. Also, I have PCOS, and because of that, my cycle was very strange, and I can't depend solely on my bleeding cycle to know what's going on. So I guess I'm here for overall just health awareness and my personal body awareness, and trying to hone in a little bit more on what all that means.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, I thought of more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wanting to understand, like, my PMS symptoms, just so I can be more aware of when my mood changes and what's going on hormonally.
I would like to second that. I would also like to know when I'm just being mean or when I'm being mean because of hormones.
When your hormones are making you do it.
Yeah.
When I have a cop out.
Right, totally. Okay, great. We are going to go over a lot of that stuff, and mostly this class is going to be the basics of what you're looking for and how to chart, and sort of generally what that might mean. And then once you start doing it, then in our follow-ups we'll touch more specifically on how to interpret it, particularly in your case. And I'm thinking too that also in the follow-ups, or I might offer a different class that's more of a holistic hormonal health class, so sort of like what all those symptoms could be indicating and what lifestyle and nutrition choices we can make to sort of support us to be our optimal hormonal picture. So I might touch on that piece a little bit tonight, but it's cool to hear that you're interested in that, and maybe we can do more about that another night. Okay. So, let's see, I've got a billion handouts here, and actually, sorry, before I start with the handouts, this is actually a handout. So, this is something I need you both to sign. It's two-sided. Basically, it's saying, you know that I'm an intern, so I'm still learning, and my mentor is going to be reviewing this, and if I forgot something, she'll let me know so I can let you know. Oh, do you need a pen, Lindsay?
I do.
You can just,
Oh, I think there's you have to sign it.
Here, you sign. That's the intern disclosure, and the other side is saying, basically just accountability, that I'm gonna teach you stuff and it is your responsibility to use it well, and if you don't understand, to clarify, and that you're not gonna hold me liable if you
I can't blame you if I get pregnant.
You can't blame me if you get pregnant, basically, or if you don't understand what your chart said, or whatever.
So that's kidding.
Thank you very much. Can I have that pen back? Okay, awesome. All right, so now I do actually want to do a little sort of a grounding. The kitty, this fish is not for you. Yeah, maybe. Sorry. That's okay. Okay, so yeah, let's just all find a comfortable seated position. Okay, so close your eyes. Just feel comfortable in however you're sitting. Find a position that's comfortable for your back. I'm just going to take a moment to listen to and find our breath. Letting it be however it is. Then draw your attention to your bottom and the backs of your thighs and your sits bones that are making contact with the couch. With the next few breaths, just sort of drop some energy downward into the pelvis. And if you can imagine the energy or feeling of love from your heart, with each breath drawing down or dripping down into your pelvis and around, surrounding your womb and your genitals with love. And just letting your womb know that you're here tonight to listen to her and to take care of her and experience healing and wisdom in the service of our wombs and our femininity and the power of the creative, incredible creative power that we hold as women in our own bodies. Just take a few more breaths and send that golden love light down. And then open your eyes when you're ready. Like how Nala jumped up in the middle. Yay. That helps me too. Alright, you can keep eating if you want, Lindsay. You're good? Okay. Okay. Okay?
The oven's off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right, so I'm gonna start with the first of your, do you wanna get your pen and notebook? Maybe just to, you might wanna add to these handouts or. Okay. I need one too. So, what we are talking about tonight, this is like a little brief fact sheet that I might leave around somewhere someday. Just giving a little background as to why people might chart their cycle, what's good about it, what's hard about it, and some other benefits. So, I think that you both know this, but I'm just going to say succinctly, hopefully, that the fertility awareness method that we're talking about tonight is based on the fact that in a woman's menstrual cycle, she's only fertile or capable of getting pregnant for a certain number of days, that she's not always fertile, and so the practice is learning to identify when those days are, and that's what we'll be using cervical fluid and temperatures to figure out. So, in the pros, here we have, if used accurately and correctly, it can be up to 99.4% effective in preventing pregnancy, which is up there with almost as good as the pill, and up there with condoms. And so, another great thing is there's no hormones or chemicals in your body getting peed out into the water, going into our environment. Some women get off of hormonal contraceptives. They experience like immediate, or when they're on them, they experience short-term things like maybe their libido tanks, or they gain weight, or things that they don't like, and then long-term afterwards can be experiencing side effects as well, because it's essentially altering your what your hormones are are doing, and it can take time for the body to come back into balance. So, so it can be used in conjunction with barrier methods, being condom, cervical cap, diaphragm. So that would be when you're fertile, you can use one of those. It's a choice that you can make. It does make the method a little bit less effective, but we'll talk about that later. And if you had a moral objection to using contraception, this would be a good method for you. Inexpensive, essentially, once you've paid for this class and any additional consults, it's essentially free. You're just paying to Xerox your charts and for the pen and thermometer. And let's see, yes, so it can be used as birth control, as mentioned above, or it can be, like you're saying, so when you know when you're fertile, if you do try to get pregnant, you'll know when's a good time to time your intercourse. No doctor's visit required, as with other methods, and it can be discontinued at any time. So, those are things I love about it, but cons, to do this method really well and get that 99.4% effectiveness rate, you really do have to be consistent in doing it every day. And I probably can't stress that enough, so I'm going to be stressing that multiple times tonight.
But not at the same time every day?
Somebody
said...
The temperature?
Yeah.
We'll go over that. But that's optimal to do it at the same time every day, and we'll talk about how to work with that if you can't.
Okay.
So it does take time and money up front to learn it. And it is recommended that once you, like for example tonight, we're going to learn this method, you're going to chart for a little bit, we're going to meet again, and then ideally you would chart for a few cycles without using it as birth control. You're just going to see what's going on with my cycles, and then we'll come back and we'll say, okay, I understand it, this is how I would use the method, and so you kind of get the like seal of approval, you totally get it. So this is not like you go home tonight and you get it and you start going immediately and using it. So it does require that your partner is committed as well, both that they're understanding how this method works, and that if you say, no, I'm fertile, I don't want to have sex, that they are the kind of partner that's going to respect that or use a barrier at that time. And that can be tricky to navigate, but usually education and letting them know why you might use this, why you would want to use this method. Hopefully they'll be supportive in that. But it's not for everyone. And so this is a big one. Irresponsibility or misuse can result in pregnancy, right? So if you know you're fertile and you have sex, then obviously you could get pregnant. It's not like okay, I'll leave it at that. So during the time when you are fertile, traditionally this method requires abstinence during that time, and that's what gives it a very high effectiveness rating. But yes, you can do alternative sex, like anal sex, or what do they call it, heavy petting, no genital to genital contact, or you could use a barrier method during that time. And some people also choose to use withdrawal during that time, and we'll talk about what that might mean. And so it does not protect against sexually transmitted infections. So it's usually good for people who are in monogamous relationships. Although you may want to women could want to track their cycles, even if they weren't in a relationship, but just to learn about their hormonal health. So that's into the other benefits category. Deepening communication and respect. This is one that I get really excited about, like how the men that I know whose partners do fertility awareness, who use that as a method, really get in tune with their partner's cycles and can actually be really supportive, like almost anticipating things and really getting the communication lines clear and like taking away the sort of shame and that we can have around our reproductive health and our vaginas and what comes out of them, and I love that about it. So yeah, empowering a woman to be in charge of her reproductive healthcare choices. So if you can go to your doctor and say, hey, this is what's going on, I've had this, I definitely ovulate on that day, my cycle's been doing this, you've got so much more information than just, no, I think my cycles are 28-ish days, you know. And then increasing a woman's overall body literacy. So what's so fun, like you're saying, is correlating what else is happening in my cycle. You know, what are the cyclical changes that I'm seeing, the moods, the libido, the creative energy. I mean, there's so many things that you can correlate in there, and it's really fun to see the patterns emerge. So we talked about that one. And, you know, a lot of people sort of can delve into this, and the idea that we might abstain during the fertile time kind of opens up the possibilities for other kinds of connection or sexual connection. Some people really get into the you know, like more tantric stuff, or I don't know, it's ultimately endless, but it's
So, for millennia, women have been gathering together to share information and knowledge and wisdom about what it means to be a woman, what it means to start getting your period, to cycle regularly, to be fertile, to conceive, be pregnant, birth a baby, nurse a baby, you know, be a mother, go through menopause, and ultimately die, and that all of these sort of life passages are what we might call women's mysteries, or, you know, ultimately they might be about the, you know, the biological sort of markers in a woman's life, but depending on what culture you come from, there are also, of course, cultural overlays about what that means and how that's either feared or revered. And if you've ever read The Red Tent, you know that it was common for women to get together when they were bleeding and to rest and recoup and be in divine connection with each other and with spirit or God. Um, and there are stories about, you know, tribal grandmothers who taught their pubescent granddaughters about their cyclical fertility by wiping smooth river rocks over their labia throughout a cycle so they could show them, you know, the wetness and how that correlated with fertility. Or, you know, when our ancestors were more tribal, you know, perhaps we were cycling together at the same rhythm with the moon. But now, you know, what we call the fertility awareness method is based on, you know, the fact that women are cyclical, but how we determine, you know, our fertility markers are really based in science. In the 1920s is when ovulation was technically first discovered, and then it was discovered that about 2 weeks after that, a woman bleeds. And in the 50s, a couple called the Billings, who lived in Australia, started to do a lot of research around cervical fluid and how that related to fertility. And in the past, you know, 50, 70 years, there have been many different organizations, some religious, some secular, that have done a lot of research, both on the physiology of women's fertility, like what's happening in their body, what's happening with their cervixes and their cervical fluid and their temperatures and why, and as well as like demographic research around, you know, using different methods of birth control, some of which are based on these fertility signals. So even today, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding, really ultimately miseducation, about the fertility awareness method and how effective is it and why is it effective and what makes it more effective or less effective. So I really want to get clear here so we're all on the same page about what exactly I'm teaching, how it's different from other methods, and how effective it can be. So if you take a look at this effectiveness studies handout, which I've just handed out, you see a table. And this is a graph that is comparing a bunch of different studies that have been done over the years about different fertility awareness based methods. And that is a sort of an umbrella term that encompasses a handful of different ways to use the information that a woman is fertile at certain points in her cycle as birth control. And different organizations have used different, some people just check cervical fluid to determine when she's fertile. Some people just do basal body temperature. And some do a combination of those, as well as people who are doing calendar or calculation methods, which is basically more predictive and is saying, often based on averages, like the average woman is fertile on certain days of her cycle and infertile on other days. And so those are usually much less effective because they're not taken in real time. So if we look here at this chart, we see the first two rows are calendar methods. So again, that's based on averages. And there's within here you can see a couple columns, and the first column is typical use. So this is the number of women who, using this method, typically get pregnant within a year out of 100 women who are using this method. So here we have 25 out of 100 women, or 25%, are getting pregnant using the rhythm method, which is just saying certain days are safe and certain days aren't safe. You're not checking anything. You're just basing it essentially on a calendar. And the standard days method is a similar version of that. And then if you look here, we have with barrier backup. So that means using barriers like condoms or diaphragms or cervical caps in the time when this method says you're fertile, how that changes how effective it is. And there's not data for the rhythm method, but for the standard days method, it increases the effectiveness of it because there's a barrier being used. And so with perfect use, which means that typical use, the column for typical use sort of accounts for human error, accounts for the fact that people don't always follow the rules, that maybe they forget or they don't understand. And perfect use, would be how effective is the method when everything is done exactly right. And so here we can see that the rhythm method can be very effective. It looks like up to 99% effective, but more likely, 90% effective. So then the next row down is basal body temperature. So it doesn't look like there's much data for that, but it is just showing that some people use basal body temperature as their only fertility indicator, and then the cervical mucus methods, the next row down, the 2-day method and the Billings ovulation method. So they're just checking cervical fluid and vaginal sensation to determine when they're fertile. And you can see that those have a typical use rating of, 13.7% of women getting pregnant typically, or up to 22% with the Billings method. With perfect use, that's much less. It's higher in the high 90s. High 90% of women can prevent pregnancy using this. And then let's see. So what we're Creighton and NAPRO technology, that's just another version of that using a combination of symptoms. And so what we're studying here is the symptothermal method, which again, sympto meaning symptoms, cervical fluid, cervical position, and thermal and basal body temperature. And here we have a typical use of 0.2 to 20% of women getting pregnant using this method. So, um, and with the barrier backup, we have 0.45 to 2.3% getting pregnant, and with perfect use, 0.3%. So that means that it's, in the high 99th percentile, can be, if used perfectly, of preventing pregnancy, which is actually pretty equivalent to the pill. So I just want to make note that here in the column where it's doing the perfect use for the symptothermal method, that here it says 99.7% effective, or there's another study, it's on the back of the sheet, that's 99.4% effective, that those were done, or that is a study that is slightly different than what I teach, because it also adds in a calculation rule. So in addition to tracking symptoms, it's also checking or saying that there are definitely certain days in the cycle that are always unsafe to have sex. So it's a little bit hard to know how effective this method is or can be, although what we do know is what makes it more effective is people who practice it who are actually really understanding their symptoms, how to check them, what they mean, how they might change, and people who come back to do appointments, follow-ups with me or with their teachers, so that they're really getting professional support and they are really understanding this, and especially if there's changes in their reproductive lives, like if they had a miscarriage afterwards, they would come back in and check things out to see how things might be different now, or after breastfeeding or during breastfeeding. Those are times where fertility changes a little bit, or near menopause. So it's really important then to have the support of a fertility awareness educator like myself. And the other things are really making sure that your partner is on board with the method, that they are understanding it, that they're respectful. And, there is something that I do want to touch on, which is what is your, we can say that our intention is not to get pregnant, but is there a part of us that feels ambivalent or excited about getting pregnant? That sometimes that sort of unconscious desires or wishes affect how we act. So for this method in particular, if there's an underlying desire to get pregnant and you're charting your symptoms, but maybe you're not doing it just right and you're getting a little lackadaisical, that of course will affect how effective the method can be. Breaking the rules, being sloppy or inconsistent is going to lower the effectiveness rate, and following the rules all the time is going to increase the effectiveness rate. So I also want to talk about the main difference between this symptothermal method, which I teach, and what you may have heard called natural family planning, which is very similar, but the natural family planning has a religious context, and says that women must be abstinent during their fertile time. So what I say is that I really support you choosing what you want to do with your sex based on what your goals are. So if you're fertile and you want to have very, very high effectiveness rates, yes, you would abstain. You would have no genital-to-genital contact during your fertile days. But you can use a barrier method like a condom or a diaphragm or a cervical cap. And sometimes people use the withdrawal method during fertile days, and that does make the method less effective because if the condom breaks and you're fertile, that's really the only time in your cycle when you actually could get pregnant. So it increases the risk, but it's, I feel like, an empowering choice for people to make, so they can choose, okay, maybe we're going to use barriers when I'm fertile and have unprotected sex when I'm not, and then they can essentially have sex throughout their cycle, just sometimes it's protected and sometimes not. So that's one way to use this information. And the method I use and that I'm teaching tonight is based primarily off of these two books, The Garden of Fertility by Katie Singer and Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler. And I also use some language and from other sources like Justice, which is an organization up in Canada that teaches the symptothermal method. So yes, it's technically the symptothermal method of fertility awareness, which is a fertility awareness-based method. Here in this class, I'm going to be referring to it as FAM, which stands for Fertility Awareness Method, but I hope that's clarified a little bit about why people might be confused about what is a fertility awareness method and how effective is it. So this is not the rhythm method, and here we go. Let's learn a little more about it.
Women's anatomy, which this may be a review for you, but I'm just going to make sure we're all on the same page here.
Review is good.
Review is good. Okay. So this is from that book, Guide to Getting It On, which is a great book. Do you know that one?
Mm.
Awesome book. Really funny and frank about sex. It's good for adults, but I've also gotten it for people when they go to college. Like, it's a fun. Okay, so this would be like if you sliced a woman down the center and we're looking at her from the side. So let's start from the outside and go in. Actually, if we're going to do that, what happened to the vagina? Start from the outside and go in. So, this is a woman with very long nails who is sort of opening up her vulva, which is what you can see sort of on the outside. Her perineum is down here. That's the area between her anus and the bottom of her lips. And these right here, these ones that are folding out, are called the inner lips, or sometimes they're called labia minora, but for some women, they're not smaller, they're bigger, so I like to call them inner lips. And then the outer lips are here. You can sort of see them here and here. And sometimes those cover the inner lips, and sometimes the inner lips stick out. And so up here is the clitoral hood, and the clitoris, the glands of the clitoris. The clitoris is actually a pretty big organ, and in some women you can see it, like if she were to open her lips like this. And in some women, you can't. It's still hiding underneath the hood. And so in this, the opening to the vagina is here, this little slit going in, and then, yeah, I mean, you can't really see it, but right above that is the urethra, or the opening to the, excuse me, the bladder. So that's on the outside. Any questions about that? But I do want to show you a really cool, this is kind of beside the point, but I really love this. These pictures of clitorises. Have you seen this? Okay.
Can you pass it around after you?
Yes. So the clitoris is actually what we can, this is like under the surface, looking sort of from the front, from like the lips. It's almost like this is underneath this. All of this can be aroused, but here's a picture. This is just a different angle. The yellow is the clitoris. Yeah, this is sort of from above, looking into the pelvis. And this is really cool. This is actual, like, not an x-ray, I don't know what it's called. Kind of looks like an x-ray, but it's colored. But anyway, this little red part that sort of looks like a caterpillar is the clitoris before arousal and then during arousal. So you can actually see how during arousal it swells, all of this tissue wall, and the clitoris sort of stands up. Some people call that a erection. Never knew. Okay, so going in from this picture, going inwards, now we're doing the cross section. So this is the vagina. So these are the lips on the outside, the outer lips, those little pink ones are the inner lips, and then going in the vagina, the vagina's walls are, in some women, kind of rigid, like an accordion, and in some women they're a little bit smoother. And then we have, up here is the uterus. And the uterus in most women tips forward over the bladder. This is the bladder. And this is the cervix. The cervix is the opening to the uterus that protrudes into the vagina. And so coming off of the uterus, sort of up, like the body of the, this is called the body of the uterus. So sort of the arms, it almost looks like, are, you may have heard them be called fallopian tubes. You can also call them oviducts. So like in feminist circles, they're like, well, how come Dr. Fallopian gets his name on our tubes? And so another technical word for them is oviducts, which means egg tube. And so the ovaries, each one nestles an ovary. You can only see one ovary here because the large intestine, the rectum, is kind of in between, but this is an ovary. And let's see, so here we have the bladder that empties out through the urethra. That would be the pee hole. And bush, I like how that's labeled. The pubic bone is here. So, let's see what's important. Okay, so the anus, the perineum. Any questions on any of that? No. Awesome. Okay, so one thing I just want to say, which I think is interesting, is that in the ovaries, when a girl is in her mom's uterus at 20 weeks, so halfway through the mom's pregnancy, she has 10 million primordial follicles, they're called. They're like the beginning of eggs in the little fetus's ovaries. And they're mature, but they're there. And then when she's born, she has the estimates vary, but like 1 million. So it's like she starts out with a lot. By the time she's born, she has 1 million. And then by the time she reaches puberty, she has about 200,000, 400,000. And then each cycle, many of them die. One of them will be ovulated. But by the time she's in menopause, as she's cycling every cycle, like all of her, during her reproductive years, she'll probably only like release 100 or 400, it's not even that many. And then by the time she's in menopause, she'll have, some people say 1,000 or hardly any left. So it's interesting, like we start out with a huge number and then it gradually tapers off. So I think that is, well, the only other thing is that the opening to the cervix, so this is a picture of the uterus and the vagina kind of torn away, which is a little bit rough looking, but the opening to the uterus is called, in the cervix, is called the os, O-S, which you can remember because those are my initials. Okay, so we're going to do a quick little male anatomy thing. This is called the jungle, not the bush, I guess, for most of these guys. And we're going to just talk a little bit here about sperm. Sperm are, so these are the testicles, here, and it's this inside is what we might refer to as the balls. They're the testes, and that's where sperm are started. That's where they are produced, and then once they're created, they go up into these. This is called the epididymis, and they stay in there for about 2 to 12 days, and they start maturing. And this whole process of being created to starting to mature, it takes about 72 days. And then at the moment of ejaculation, the sperm are shot up these tubes, which are called the vas deferens. And the seminal vesicles, like produce this sort of, it's essentially like the semen that mixes with the sperm, so the goo. And then they're sort of through ejaculation, when a man ejaculates, that pumps that, mixes the sperm with the semen, and shoots out the penis, which actually would probably be more direct if you were having an ejaculation. So one interesting fact about this is that if the sperm were the size of humans and everything were scaled up, so imagine one tiny sperm, that one ejaculation would be the same as a human being shot 15 miles in 2 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. And so like I said, it takes, about 72 days for the sperm to develop, but about 1,000 are being produced every second. And so it's just for men, it's this constantly producing sperm, and each ejaculate has somewhere between 50 and 500 million sperm. That, of course, depends on the age and the health of the guy and all these things, but those are the main things to know about that. Any questions about that? No? Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about spermies. And what do they need to live? Does anybody have any ideas? Warmth. Coziness.
Sugar?
Yes.
It's like a sugar bath or something?
Yeah.
That's all I know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, actually the semen, the goo that surrounds in the semen that's surrounding the sperm is full of nutrients and sugars that keep them alive. And semen is alkaline, and it needs, essentially, if semen comes in contact, outside the body or inside the body, and the vagina is normally acidic, they'll die within 30 minutes to maybe 4 hours. That's like the upper limit. Like they get killed essentially by the vagina's acidity, and there's no nutrients in there for them. And the vagina also has white blood cells that kill them. So what they need is cervical fluid, essentially, to live. And we're going to go more into like exactly what cervical fluid is and has, but in fertile cervical fluid, they can live up to 7 days. Most sources, say more like 2 to 5, but there have been accounts of them living that long. So that is partially why we're very keen on observing our cervical fluid, because if we've got it, it means that sperm can be living inside of us. And just genital to genital contact is enough. So even if the man is not ejaculating, she's singing.
So sweet. I know, I've never heard that before.
Fully ejaculating inside, there can be enough semen, whether he's ejaculated outside or even just in genital to genital contact, for there to be enough sperm to be living in the cervical fluid.
So that's how Joseph got Mary pregnant.
Yes, that must be the way. Oh my gosh, I never thought about that.
Well, you've heard about, the
The immaculate.
Yeah, well, you know, like, I don't know, like in 17 when we were in high school or something, right? The girl that writes in and she's like, I've never had sex, but I'm pregnant.
Right. Yes, that's how that happens. I guess for Mary too. She was a virgin.
Yeah.
Or so they say. Okay.
But
Yeah.
how long can the sperm live inside of you? Because I thought it was like 2 weeks. This is what I thought, no?
7 days.
That would be the maximum, would be 7 days if there's cervical fluid, fertile cervical fluid. Oh, this is good that you're asking this question because it's making me, it's like hard to talk about this before talking about the next piece, but, no, definitely not 2 weeks.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
If it's 7 days, what if I'm not ovulating yet, but I will be in 4 days, and sperm goes inside of me, and then in 4 days I'm ovulating, can that existing sperm fertilize?
Yes, if on the day that you had sex, you had fertile cervical fluid, that was gonna keep it alive, because otherwise your vagina is going to be acidic and it's gonna kill them in 4 hours.
So
But
with-
is the fertile cervical fluid, can you have fertile cervical fluid 4 days before you ovulate?
Yes, and we're gonna talk about that.
okay, so you account for it in this method.
You what?
You account for those 7 days in the method.
Okay, this is very important for me to be very clear about this. You account for the fact that what you're looking for in this method is cervical fluid. And if you have cervical fluid, you have the potential to be keeping sperm alive inside your vagina. If you don't have cervical fluid, your vagina is acidic and sperm will die. And actually, this is kind of a good segue. We're going to get into what's happening hormonally and how we know you're about to ovulate.
I guess maybe I don't know the difference between cervical fluid and just fluid.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay. I'll
Um,
be patient.
no, it's all good. I think actually it's hard. It's like maybe I should have said that later. What do sperm need to live? So I will make note of that. Talk about after I talk about sex. So we're going to talk about what does a healthy cycle look like from a hormonal point of view and what's happening in the ovaries and in the uterus. Okay, so there are, I'm sure you've heard the word hormone. It is a chemical messenger, essentially. So created in one part of the body and affects change either another part of the body or sometimes locally. Okay, so flashback to whatever 9th grade biology. Here we go. When we in this method, when we talk about the menstrual cycle, we're talking about day 1 of your period to the day 1 of your next period. So the menstrual cycle, you know, you may have heard it, oh, that's 28 days. It doesn't always have to be 28 days, but that's what we're talking about. And we start out menses or menstruation. That's when you have your period. And these lines represent different hormones, and I think I'll just introduce them. Well, the main hormones that we're going to focus on are estrogen and progesterone, so the purple and the red. But there are a couple other ones that come into play. So during menstruation, as you can see, these are sort of represent blood levels of hormones. So like how much of these particular hormones are in the body during the menstrual cycle. Okay. So at menstruation, you can see hormonal activity is pretty low, right? All the hormones are kind of low down. A few days into the cycle, a hormone called follicle-stimulating hormone is released from the pituitary, which is a gland in the center of the brain. and that starts stimulating follicles within the ovary, which are basically like immature eggs. Remember how I told you that women are born with, however many, okay. So each cycle, about 10 to 20 follicles in both ovaries are stimulated by this follicle stimulating hormone. And what that means is about 10 to 20 of them start to ripen or develop. It's like they have, a follicle is like a sac around the immature egg that sort of gives it nutrients and helps it grow. And so these follicles, this is meant to be an ovary. Of course you have two of them, but this would just be one. And so these follicles start emitting estrogen as they grow. And so here you can see estrogen, this purple line, increasing. So they're secreting estrogen, the follicles. And one of them eventually becomes bigger, dominant, they call it.
What?
One of the follicles.
Okay.
So,
And the eggs are inside the follicles.
yes. So one of them becomes dominant and just in one ovary, and the other one's sort of, they're still developing a little bit, but essentially this one becomes, the dominant one becomes even more sensitive to estrogen and sort of starts to grow more and more and more and more. Let me see if that is true, but I'm just trying to.
Do you want this blanket? Is what I'm
okay.
Okay. Here, go.
That's a really beautiful blanket. I was noticing the hair on it. The fringe.
Very man hair.
Oh. Okay, so the ovaries are emitting, the follicles are emitting estrogen. As the cycle goes on, more and more estrogen because they're kind of, they're all growing, and then one becomes sensitive to it. And the estrogen, it like, oh no, now I'm drawing a blank. Hold on. Well, I kind of forget what I was going to say, but it's okay because I can just roll with it here. So one of the follicles becomes dominant, and when estrogen reaches a certain threshold, like then that triggers the pituitary to release this other hormone called luteinizing hormone, and that causes ovulation, which is when the egg, that's what these little, by the way, these little shiny dots are, sorry, to be released through the wall of the ovary. And once that happens, estrogen drops off, and what's left of the follicle, the sac that was holding the egg, becomes what we call the corpus luteum. Luteum in, I don't know, Greek or Latin means yellow. So that starts releasing, the corpus luteum starts releasing progesterone, which is this red. And it does that for about usually 12 to 16 days after ovulation. Typically, like classically, they say 14 days. Until we get here at the end of the cycle, so it's releasing progesterone, and slowly, and then as this, the corpus luteum dies, it stops releasing progesterone, and it's the drop off in progesterone that causes another cycle to begin, that causes her to bleed again. So, what is important to notice here is that in the beginning of the cycle, estrogen, the purple, is the more dominant hormone, and after ovulation, progesterone is the more dominant hormone. So I'm gonna go through the cycle like a lot of times and talk about how it, because it's kind of the basis of all of this, and talk about how it affects different parts of the. So we talked about how it affects the ovary, and so here we have, this is what's happening with the uterus. That first one is menstruation. So the lining of the uterus, called the endometrium, is being shed, coming out the cervix through the vagina. It's not just blood that's being shed. Sometimes it's chunks of tissue or a little bit of mucus. We usually just refer to it as flu. And so as estrogen is building in the beginning of the cycle, that helps build the endometrium, the walls of the uterus. And kind of another piece of that.
It's a different one.
Okay.
Rosemary.
Whoa. Wow.
Good.
Sweet. It tastes like honey. Okay. Yeah, so the lining of the uterus begins to grow. And then at ovulation, when progesterone becomes dominant because of the corpus luteum that's secreting it, progesterone causes the endometrium to kind of get more plush and more blood filled. And one way that one of my teachers talks about it is estrogen builds the lining and progesterone makes it smart. It's like it makes it ready, essentially. So progesterone, progestation, ready to house a baby if a woman were to get pregnant, ready for the placenta to be implanted into it and deliver the nutrients. Yeah.
Endometrium
Mm-hmm.
is the lining of the uterus.
Yeah, the inside of the uterus, and that's what.
And that's what bleeds, or that's what comes out.
Yeah, it's like it grow every month. It's like it grows, or every cycle it grows, and then it's shed, and it grows, and is nourished by. It grows with estrogen, is nourished by progesterone, and then sheds when you have your period. So I probably should have said this at the beginning, but now I'm going to say it now, and that is that when we talk about these phases, we have different names for them. So we talked about menses, or menstruation, or your period. That's when you're bleeding. And then this first phase from menstruation to ovulation is called the follicular phase, because follicles, okay? Ovulation is the moment, although it's often not a moment, it's usually like
Because
20
that's
minutes.
quite the action shot right
I know,
there.
right?
I love that.
That happens, and then after ovulation, this is called the luteal phase because of the corpus luteum, yellow body that produces progesterone. So that's, you may have heard some of those terms before.
You said ovulation, you first said moment and then can take.
Yeah, because I have a cool picture of that actually. Oh yeah. So, like when you read about this, about ovulation, you know, sometimes the words they use are so funny. It's like the egg bursts from the wall of the uterus, and this surgeon was doing a surgery on a woman at the exact moment of ovulation. And so he captured on camera what was happening. And so here we have, this is a woman's ovary, this big part right here. So this is his tool, his surgical instrument. This big part is her ovary. And then this sort of dark purpley part is the follicle. So that's this. See, and it's swollen, it's the dominant follicle. It's like sticking out. And the egg is that little yellow thing. And it sort of goes, the order of the photos goes like this. And so it's almost like, it's really like being born. And he said this process took 20 minutes for him to record the full thing. So I don't know if it always takes 20 minutes or you know, if just in this case, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's not necessarily like, yeah, I just think that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Um, and anyway, so once the egg is released, I don't think I'd mentioned this when I was doing the anatomy, but these, at the end of these oviducts, or the fallopian tubes, are what they call fimbriae, and they're essentially like, they look like sea anemones, and they cover the uterus, and they sort of move around the uterus, and as the ovary releases, or as the follicle releases the egg, it like sort of sucks it up into the oviduct, or the fallopian tube, where it will live for 12 to 24 hours. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about this is good, I think. Let's talk a little bit about what estrogen and progesterone do to the body with relation to the menstrual cycle. So in the follicular phase, before ovulation, estrogen is dominant because it's created by the follicles. And estrogen creates slippery, wet cervical fluid that changes the pH of the vagina. So remember when I was talking about how sperm need an alkaline environment and they die in acidity. So when estrogen is present, the cervical fluid begins to be created in the cervix. Another thing that and secreted by the cervix. So another thing that estrogen does is it, in many women, is it raises the cervix and sort of opens it and softens it. So the uterus is attached to the pelvis by ligaments, and estrogen. Let me see if I have a good picture of that. I don't. That would be a good thing to have. But essentially, okay, so here we have our model pelvis. Here's the vulva. Here's the uterus and the cervix. So the cervix is attached to the pelvis, and with estrogen rising, it actually pulls the ligaments sort of shorten, which sort of pulls the uterus upwards and farther away from the vaginal opening. And it also changes the consistency of the cervix.
So does it raise the pH to make it more, or to make it less acidic for the spermies?
Okay, it makes it more alkaline, which I think is actually a raising of the pH, right? Is that right? Acid and alkaline, I get kind of confused
I know, me too.
on the scale, but
Well, it's okay. Either way, it moves towards
alkalinity, yeah. And so it's softening the cervix. The cervix is rising within the vagina, meaning it's getting harder to reach. And it's also, estrogen also cools the body temperature a little bit. And so that's happening before ovulation, and so those are the things that we actually look for in this method are cervical secretions, what's happening with the cervical mucus, what's happening with the feeling and the depth of the cervix, and what's happening with the basal body temperature. So once we get to progesterone, oh my god, I'm totally like losing this right now. Maybe we need a break. Let me just finish this little bit and then we'll have a break. My brain is needing a little break. Okay, so after ovulation and luteal phase, progesterone is the dominant hormone, and what progesterone does is it increases the basal body temperature, and it inhibits another ovulation. So it inhibits follicle stimulating hormone. So once you ovulate, you can't ovulate again until your next cycle, until this guy dies 14 days after you've ovulated, or 12 to 16 days. And it well, this is sort of just getting more specific about what's happening here, but it's creating proteins and enzymes and sugars and mucus in here in the endometrial lining, which is what would nourish an embryo if it were to implant. And it causes the cervical mucus to be thick and sort of stay globbed in the cervix, and that is hostile to sperm, which and makes the vagina become acidic again. And it makes the tip of the cervix become harder and closed. Whereas here, close to ovulation, it's getting more open and soft. So let's take a little break. Well, actually, does anybody have questions about that? And then I can take a little break.
No.
I need to pee. What I'm
Pause.
going to talk about now is what is normal, what are the variations of normal, what that might look like on a hormonal level, and then we're going to talk about temperature and cervical fluid and how that might reflect these things, these variations. So let's start off by saying what is the length, how many days are in each of these phases? Okay, so menses, having your period, is typically 2 to 7 days of bleeding. Some women more, some women less. Sometimes there's spotting afterwards. And then the follicular phase, so that's what this means right here, variable length. This length from menses till ovulation can vary. And what is going to cause it to vary can be illness, stress, traveling.
It's really loud. She's gonna watch this and be like, wow, I can't hear what was that much.
It's all good. Okay, so from menstruation to ovulation can change in length, the number of days there. You may have heard like, okay, a typical cycle is 28 days and ovulation is on day 14. Well, what I'm going to talk about is that isn't always true. And the amount of days between ovulation and when you get your period again is usually a fixed length. Typically, meaning that it's usually the same amount every time in each woman. And it's usually around 14 days. Sometimes it's between 12 and 16 is pretty typical. So let's just say it's pretty much the same all the time, and this is the one that's going to change in length. So if one cycle you have a 28-day cycle and the next cycle you have a 32-day cycle, likely, and this is what charting is going to tell you, but likely this, from when you got your period to when you ovulated, just was a few days longer. So that's one of the
The
actual...
follicular phase.
Yeah. Follicular phase is variable length, luteal phase is the same.
And the follicular phase changes according to stress, illness,
Travel,
travel.
Travel?
Who you're around?
Yeah.
Other
other
women's
women.
cycles?
Definitely. Can sync up, which is crazy.
I'm going to mention this though, that this ovulation, what I call, the moment of ovulation or the moments of ovulation, in most cycles, one follicle becomes dominant in the follicular phase, and one egg is released at ovulation. Very rarely, there is a double ovulation or triple ovulation, but they always, this is very important, happen within 24 hours of the first one.
Can you say that again?
Yes. So,
You don't have to rephrase it. You can just say it.
Just say it again.
Just say it.
Okay, so there is only one ovulation per cycle.
Okay.
Occasionally, there may be a double or triple ovulation, which you may have heard of, but those second or third ovulations always occur within 24 hours of the first one.
Okay.
And here's why. Because once the egg is ovulated, this corpus luteum is produced, and that makes progesterone. And progesterone inhibits ovulation because it inhibits this one. So that's the way that fraternal twins or triplets are conceived, because there's two ovulations, there's two eggs that are released. But it's never like, what I really want to make clear is it's never like you ovulate, then 4 days later you ovulate again, then you know.
If there's a double, it's always within 24
4 hours of the first. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about variations of the cycle and variations of normal. The same woman could have different length cycles at different points in her reproductive life, and that might be totally normal for her. Or sometimes variations from normal can be a sign that there's an imbalance present. So the beautiful thing about FAM is you get to learn what's normal for you, so you can know if you start straying from that. So let's take a look at this graph right here. So the blue-purple line is estrogen, the red is progesterone, and the dotted line represents ovulation. So here the first one where it says textbook cycle, it's similar to that felted graph, and what it's showing is that bleeding starting on day 1, and 14 days later ovulation happens, and about 14 days after that, day 28, the woman begins bleeding again. So this is a 28-day cycle, sort of a classic cycle. The next one is a long cycle. So if you just look at this, what do you see? What's the difference? That's right. The amount of time or the length of the follicular phase from day 1 to the time of ovulation in this case is actually 22 days. And then from ovulation until the bleeding is 14 days here as well. So like I mentioned, a long cycle might happen under times of stress or illness or traveling. Some women are just prone to having longer cycles, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything's off. Sometimes when girls just start menstruating or when they're breastfeeding, they might see this variation. And sometimes before menopause, women see this as well. So let's see, then we have down here a short cycle, and this one starts on day 1, and by day 11 the woman has ovulated, and then her luteal phase is again about 2 weeks long, and this cycle would be a 24-day cycle from start to finish. And so a short phase is when the follicular phase is about 10 days or less, and that can be sometimes caused by stress or aging, getting close to menopause, and then for some women it's just normal to have short cycles. So let's look at the next one. This is the split peak cycle, and this is, as you can see, this estrogen is sort of rising and falling before ovulation happens. So ovulation happening on day 21, and then once that happens, in this case, 12 days later, then she gets her period. So this sometimes can be normal, like in times of stress, and sometimes it can be a sign that there's some hormonal imbalances happening. Excuse me. And the last one is an anovulatory cycle, in which you can see there actually is no ovulation. And women can experience anovulatory cycles. Some people say, sometimes even once a year, and that can be normal. It can be normal when you're coming off of the pill or other hormonal contraception, or when you're first starting bleeding or after breastfeeding. But it also happens with some reproductive disorders like PCOS, for example. And so this chart, I just want you to see two things. First of all, as a reminder, the follicular phase is the one that is changing in length, and that the luteal phase is pretty much the same amount of days, no matter how long the final cycle is, the number of days that the cycle actually lasts. And also to show you that this, you could be a woman who normally has a 28-day cycle, and then one time you have a short cycle. And this is why the rhythm method and predictive charting doesn't work very well for a lot of women, because we aren't always the textbook cycle, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. So let's see. One benefit of knowing FAM, like I said, is learning what's normal for you, and you can start to correlate your lifestyle and your health choices to see how your cycles are affected and how your hormones are affected, so that
3 things that we use to tell us what's going on with our hormones: basal body temperature, and cervical fluid, and cervical position. So let's start with the basal body temperature, right up there by that thermometer. The way to do that is you take your temperature under your tongue. Some people do it vaginally, but hey, it's pretty easy to do under your tongue. First thing in the morning, before you get out of bed, before you go pee, before you do anything. It's like you wake up, it's literally the first thing you do.
What if you're like, you hit the snooze button every 10 minutes for 30, 45 minutes? Like, don't do that and do it right away, or do it when you're like waking up for real?
I want to make this practice sustainable for you. But the way I do that, because I'm a snoozer, is the alarm goes off, I put it in, it takes a minute, it beeps, I'm done, I put this on, and I'm still snoozing, and then I hit my snooze 4 times. So it is the first thing I do.
You go back to sleep after you...
Yeah, kind of in that half and half realm. And it's important that you've had at least 3 consecutive hours of sleep beforehand, meaning you've had a good night of sleep, or you've slept, if you, because that might affect your temperature readings. So,
But
yes,
I
no
don't
question.
sleep for 3 consecutive hours in the morning.
What do you mean?
I wake up.
You wake up many times throughout the night, in the middle of the
Yeah.
night. Well, I would say the most important thing is to start doing it and see what we can see. Because often, we'll see a pattern anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the goal. And then the important things, right? Use the same thermometer, so you're comparing apples to apples. Don't just randomly use thermometers. Just leave this one at your bedside table. It's easy.
But that's not a normal thermometer.
Well, this is a basal body thermometer. You could use a fever thermometer, but these usually
Oh, yeah, I didn't even know it's different. What does that mean?
yeah.
What's a basal body?
And where can you get it?
Well, I have one here that you could have. I can give it to you. You can order them online, or you can, sometimes CVS will have them in their thermometer section. Some people do use fever thermometers, but I suggest these as they're often a little bit more accurate. Some basal body thermometers read so 98.67, but we don't actually need that. We just need it 98.6. Just that 1 degree, which is what fever thermometers do as well, but I do prefer these.
And the important thing, is to use the same thermometer under the same part of your tongue. I actually saw this really interesting map of underneath someone's tongue, like what the different temperatures were, and they were varying slightly depending on how far back it was or how close it was. So just the idea is, whatever, always do it under the right side, or however you do it, just
Same place.
same thing. And yeah, this particular one is, and many of them have what is like a recording feature. So you do it, and then it records the temperature, and then next time you turn it on, it shows you the temperature that was there last time, which is good because if you put it in and you fall back asleep, then next time you turn it on, you can be like, oh, that's what it was, and you can mark that on the chart.
That you said most basal body thermometers do that, or
Yes.
Okay.
You can also use like a regular glass thermometer, but those can be, I've broken so many of those. They're just like, on your nightstand, but they don't beep. So some people like that. And if it's a glass one, you have to like put it in for 10 minutes, whereas these,
fuck that.
yeah, right. But some people, they like it, or they like the way it feels in their mouth, or but I think these are easy. The thing that is kind of annoying about this particular one, but there are other ones that don't do this, is it beeps. So like if I turn it on, it tells me my temperature last time, which was 97.5, and then it goes to the blanks. And you put it on your tongue. So it's gonna beep like that for about a minute.
What, like every 10 seconds or something?
Mm-hmm. And then, I don't actually want to wait here and do my whole thermometer, but at the end it goes beep, 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 beep. And then it will have the final.
Do other
Temperature.
basal body thermometers do that? I mean, you need a beep.
You need a beep at the end. Not as much, you don't need it throughout. Some people like it because it's like, oh, I know it's working when I'm half asleep. You could just look for one. I don't know a brand off the top of my head, but if you were to go to Amazon, you could probably find one that doesn't beep
Until the end.
until the end. And you want to make sure it's in, well, sometimes they'll go back and forth, but at least has a Fahrenheit option. Okay, that was kind of a dumb thing to say, but there are charts that are in Celsius, and I find them to be a little bit confusing. I'm just going to talk about cervical fluid, because this is really the most important piece of this practice. And it's the piece that's going to let you know when you start being fertile.
I'm sorry, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Does the basal body temperature relate to one of those specific things?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Okay. So skip down to the bottom. This is the BBT, that's another word, basal body temperature. So estrogen lowers the basal body temperature, and progesterone, which is secreted by the corpus luteum, raises it. So what we will see is that after ovulation, the temperatures that we have will be in a higher range than they were before ovulation.
Is it fair to say that the highest point that your basal body temperature is when you've what?
When you ovulate?
It's after you've ovulated. So
Right after
Oh.
you've ovulated.
because, okay, so let me explain that. That's really a good point. So, so at ovulation, the egg is released, and what the sac, the follicle that was holding the egg, becomes the corpus luteum, the yellow body, and that is what releases progesterone. And the progesterone is what causes the temperature to rise. And so once you've ovulated, your temperature will rise because of progesterone. But it happens after you've ovulated. So, go ahead.
So I lost it.
So, well, I mean, maybe you're getting there, but it doesn't look like the temperature changes a lot before you ovulate, so it seems like it'd be hard to know when you ovulated based on the temperature. But that's why we have a cervical fluid.
Right.
But that's also why you chart it a couple months ahead of time before you start using it, right?
But still, if the variable length of the follicular phase can vary from month to month.
Yes, but okay, so before ovulation, from your period to when you have ovulation, you know, your temperature, so let's talk about what your temperatures might be. I'm realizing that this class needs to be like 15 hours long and not 3, but that's okay. Before ovulation, because estrogen is the dominant hormone, they're going to be in a lower range, and I could maybe show you what is that range. So it's actually not, it's usually lower than, you know, we talk about 98.6 as being the average. Well, the basal body temperature first thing in the morning is usually always lower than that no matter what. And the first range before ovulation is usually below 97.5 degrees. And then after ovulation, well, it's gonna look different. It'll be like, it's gonna go up by a few tenths of a degree. So it's subtle.
Before ovulation.
After. So before ovulation.
It sounds like you're concerned, like how are you gonna know that you're about to ovulate and that you...
Sounds like you can't tell that you're about to ovulate based on your temperature.
That's true.
Okay.
You tell that you're about to ovulate based
Based on
on
the
your cervical fluid, and your basal body temperature says, you've already ovulated, you've ovulated.
Okay.
And so hopefully your patterns are going to line up, because the estrogen is going to give you some cervical fluid that you're going to check. Your temperature will be low, and you'll know, oh, I'm getting fertile because I'm having cervical fluid. And then you ovulate, and then the temperature will go up, and you'll know I already ovulated. Plus, your cervical fluid is going to change because there's no longer estrogen dominant, it's progesterone dominant.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so for birth control, the way that we can use the basal body temperature is that it's basically saying, game on, knock yourself out again, right?
Meaning you can
have sex.
Well, not exactly, but yes. So the temperature tells us that ovulation has taken place. And we have certain rules that I will talk about way down the line around how you know when you're safe to have sex again. And because remember how the egg potentially can live 24 hours after ovulation. So we have a couple days that we add as buffer after we know we've ovulated, just to make sure we're totally safe that we couldn't get pregnant. So it's not like the day your temperature goes up, you're safe to have sex, but the day your temperature goes up, you do know you ovulated.
And then you give it another day or two or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about how many days. There are things that can affect your temperature readings, like if you don't get consistent sleep, potentially, if you had alcohol the night before, if you have a fever, all of those things. Maybe if you're all of a sudden sleeping really snuggled up to somebody that you don't usually like. Well, and there are things. The reason you do it every day is so you can see your general patterns, and you'll know, oh, something was off. About taking your temperature is that you'll know once the temperature's gone up and you know you've ovulated, then you can usually say, about 14 days after that you're going to get your period again. So it's a great predictor of when you're going to get your period. But now we're going to talk about cervical fluid, which is really the most important part of this charting practice in terms of birth control. So cervical fluid is created by the glands. This is such a cool thing, I think. This is where I get super dorky here. Okay, within the cervix, it's like a canal, right? Like an opening that from the inside of the womb into the vagina, and it is lined with. If you were to look at it microscopically, it would be looking like if this is your cervix, okay, the inside, if you were to do a cross section, is, you know, almost looking like this. Like there are going up into the womb. And so these here are glands that secrete cervical fluid. And within each one of these glands this is sort of like a close-up of this area, are all of these, what they call crypts. And each one of these is lined with cells that secrete fluid, cervical fluid. And these crypts are affected by estrogen and progesterone. And so the type of fluid that they secrete is triggered by how much estrogen is there. So we, as in our reproductive years, have 600 to 800 of these little crypts in our cervix. That is like a lot. Little mucus producing cell cavities. So the researchers that first discovered that these different glands produce different types of cervical fluid. Like this gland might produce a slightly different one than this one, and they're going to be activated depending on what's happening in the hormones. So essentially, like the general pattern that is pretty typical is that as estrogen rises, as the follicles are developing, they're creating estrogen, and estrogen causes cervical fluid. And the closer you get to ovulation, the more wet the cervical fluid becomes. And the cervical fluid is created here in the cervix, but it's wet enough that it will actually migrate down and be felt at the opening of the vagina. So it's and when you notice it, you know that you're starting to have more estrogen, which means your follicles are developing, which means you're approaching ovulation. And the function of the cervical fluid is that it can, like we talked about, keep sperm alive for up to 5 days inside the vagina. The other thing that it does, which is pretty cool, is it filters abnormal sperm. So if you were trying to get pregnant, like some of the sperm that are created are kind of wonky and, they don't swim right, or they have chromosomal problems, and that cervical fluid actually traps them and lets the good ones through most of the time. Some women, they jump straight from, for some women, they have their period, and then they have a few days where there is no cervical fluid present at the opening of the vagina, and then they begin to see cervical fluid. So what's happening there with infertile cervical fluid, which is present. Okay, so if you were to look at infertile cervical fluid up close in a microscope, the structure would kind of look like a mesh. This is the kind of fluid that sticks in the cervix. It doesn't come out. It creates a plug that doesn't allow sperm in it. It essentially sort of traps the sperm, and it creates a hostile or acidic vaginal environment. So essentially, infertile cervical fluid stays in the cervix and kills sperm, doesn't allow them in. And that happens when there isn't very much estrogen, which there isn't at the beginning of the cycle for many women, and there also isn't here after ovulation. So as ovulation approaches, a woman will notice, probably, a different kind of cervical fluid beginning to build up, and it can be, you can call it like a fertile wave. So picture like an increasing amount of fertility, right? And what happens there is these, as estrogen starts pumping, it starts triggering some of these crypts to produce wetter cervical fluid, and that looks like the cells of it sort of become more aligned, and then it kind of liquefies the closer you get to ovulation, and it creates literally these like a super highway, a pathway for the sperm to go up into the cervix and into the uterus, and potentially into the oviduct where the egg would be waiting for fertilization. So, and this kind of fertile cervical fluid nourishes sperm. It's alkaline, it has proteins, it has food for them. They love it. It keeps them alive. So I want to get in and like do some experiential feeling of, it's not actually cervical fluid that I brought you, believe it or not, but things that feel like cervical fluid. So we can talk about what it feels like, how you would check for it, and what the differences could be. So did I give you yes. Okay, so let's just look at this cervical fluid piece of that, the CF, it's also called CF. So the practice of checking for it is you check for cervical fluid at least 3 times a day, and you're looking for change from the last time you checked. What are you finding? How is it different from the last time you checked? And so here's how you check. You wash and dry your hands before you go to the bathroom. That's something that can be different than what you normally might do. And so as you take your underwear down, if you wear underwear, you look and see, is there anything in my underwear? Like crusty things, wet spots, gooey stuff. And that can be cervical fluid. Or is there anything in my pubic hair? If you have pubic hair, sometimes cervical fluid will begin its wave as like, just, you might notice like crusty in your pubic hair, like you don't have anything, and then the next day you've got stickiness in the pubes. And if when you sit down, if you notice any drip into the toilet, so sometimes you might see like you're peeing and then you see a drip of like milky fluid that looks different. It looks like a, it's not clear and yellow, it's like a boop. Mm-hmm. So you go to the bathroom like you normally do. And then as you're wiping, this is also, I know you think this, yes, I'm pretty sure you know how to wipe, but okay, the difference is you want to fold your toilet paper like this and not crumpled up. And so you wipe from your vagina down to your anus, so across your perineum, and you just are noticing, like in your mind, or sensing, how does that feel? Is it slippery to go over it? Is it like dry and sticky? Is it smooth? And the presence of cervical fluid is going to, if cervical fluid is there, it's going to make the way that the paper glides, make it glide more, like make it more slippery or wet feeling.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it only called cervical fluid when you're ovulating, or does it have a different name? There's something that happened earlier in the evening that made me think that it's only called cervical fluid at a certain point. Is that not true?
Okay. No. So what comes out of your vagina is a combination of things. Some of it is just the cell wall of the vagina it's called vaginal cell slough. It's like just the cells dying and coming out, and that can happen throughout the cycle. But what we're looking for is cervical fluid, which begins as estrogen begins to rise, and that also will come out of the vagina. It will mix with the vaginal cell slough, and as it gets more fertile, more closer to ovulation, the amount and the quality of the cervical fluid is going to change, and it's going to become more wet. And at first, it sort of mixes with the vaginal cell slough, and so it might be kind of whitish or milky. And then as it gets closer to ovulation, often it's much clearer. Like there becomes so much of it that it's clear, stretchy, slippery. And I think that does that answer your question a little bit, or no?
I guess so.
Doesn't sound like it did. So, before ovulation, if you notice anything different or anything,
My perception
yes.
is that it's always different.
What do you mean?
Different from what? What do you mean different from?
Like every day you have something different, you're noticing something different
Kind of.
in your own body,
Yes.
is what you're saying. Okay, so what we'll do is it's important to write down exactly how it's different, what the quality of it is. And we might see with you that you have this would be an exception, so I almost want you to like plug your ears, but
What, meat above my ears?
yeah, no, you don't have to, it's okay. But like you might have what's called a basic infertile pattern. Like some women have they just constantly have some kind of fluid. And then sometimes they have more, or it changes to a different kind. And so if there's always the same kind of fluid before ovulation and after ovulation, then that's called a basic infertile pattern, and you can definitely work with that, but we would have to like do more one-on-ones with that.
How do you know? I guess you just get used to your body. You just, but like, you know, I have yeast infections sometimes, and they're always asking me what kind of discharge, and so I guess I've always been like, well, I don't know, it's just like discharge. I don't know what it is, but maybe this is, if it's not an infection, this is what it is. It's cervical fluid, and if I get to know it, then I get to know what's happening
Right.
and what's normal and what's not normal
Yes.
for my body.
That can
on a
definitely,
basis.
for sure.
And then what about like you like the arousal? Well, like what's the fluid when you get aroused?
Yeah.
And like, you know,
I'm
these
listening.
days like can happen like on a daily basis when I just think about that
Nice.
and I get wet and I'm like, couldn't that confuse the
Mhm.
cervical fluid testing?
Yeah. So arousal fluid is produced in the there's these glands, oh there they are. Kind of inside the, like at the base of the vagina, or yeah. And that's where arousal fluid is secreted. So cervical fluid is made in the cervix. Arousal fluid is secreted here. It may have a similar quality to fertile cervical fluid, but the thing is, cervical fluid, that's why you check cervical fluid multiple times throughout the day. So you're going to be finding it. And I would say don't check when you know you're aroused, because that's going to be confusing. The consistency and quality of cervical fluid is usually different than arousal fluid. Arousal fluid is usually thinner and usually clear, and like when you rub it for a little bit, it'll kind of disappear. Whereas cervical fluid is like you could almost put it in water and it would just stay in a little lump.
And when one more question. So can you feel when you're secreting cervical fluid? Sometimes I hear women say like they know when they're ovulating,
mhm.
and I don't know, like you personally, because sometimes I have the sensation of like something just came out of my vagina,
Mhm.
a blob just came out of my
Mhm.
vagina,
Yeah,
and that's probably cervical fluid.
yes,
Okay.
that is most
And
definitely.
I could go to the bathroom then and like.
And you could probably feel it. You might even see it like literally hanging out of your vulva.
I have seen that.
Yeah, you might see it on your panties as like a wet, big, round spot. Like, so that would be, yeah, like a release of the fluid into the vagina. And it sometimes feels like, when you have your period, you might feel a similar like gush of blood. It's maybe a similar feeling. But some women describe it as cooler, like the period feels like warm and then this feels like colder. So that's just one thing to notice. But one of the things that you can notice is, and I encourage you to do, is check in sort of, like without actually checking your cervical fluid, just bring your attention to your vulva and your vagina throughout the day a couple times and just see how does it feel. And you may notice that earlier in the cycle, before your fertile wave begins, it's sort of a dry feeling. And then as the fertile wave begins, as cervical fluid begins to become present, there might be a fuller feeling, like the labia actually can become sort of engorged, almost like arousal, but unrelated, like not when you're aroused. And it might feel slippery, like when you're walking a little bit, or cooler or wet. So yeah, those are definitely things to note. And usually those will align with your cervical fluid. Like you might have that feeling and you go to check and, oh yeah, sure enough, there's cervical fluid. As this goes over your perineum. Then you look at this. Okay, was there anything, when I wiped, there's going to be urine that's soaked in, but is there anything else on there? Is there, like if you look at it in the light, is it shiny? Is there something that I could pick up off of it? And that's called finger testing, is when you take a little sample of something, of cervical fluid, either from your toilet paper or from your vagina, and you rub it between your fingers and you see what it's like. That's sort of the most important part of this practice. And so, let me get my little vulva here. Okay, so you've done that, you've looked, you've seen if there's anything, and then you're going to take your finger and you're going to, probably your middle finger or your index finger, and you're just going to put it, and this is why you've washed your hands beforehand, you're going to put your finger essentially right here at the opening of the vagina. And you don't have to go in far, just a little bit like this. And you're going to bring your finger out, and without looking at it, you're just going to feel. Yeah, like, what does it feel like when I rub my fingers together? Is there anything there? Does it feel slippery, wet, slick? Okay, you're just going to make a note of that, and then you're going to actually look at it and see, is there anything there? And if you don't have cervical fluid, it's going to feel probably like, okay, suck the stuff out of your mouth, the spit. And just put your finger on the inside of your cheek. Quick. Okay. So it's going to probably, now tap them together. How does it feel? Dry. Right. Okay, so that's probably what it's going to feel like if you have no cervical fluid. It's like, yes, your vagina is moist. It's always going to be sort of wet like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing really there. You can't see anything. It dries really instantaneously. Okay, that's no cervical fluid. Once you've done this, you're going to look, you're going to feel it, you're going to look, you're going to see what's happening with the color, consistency, and quality of it. And now we are going to get, and the best times to do this checking, are when you sit down and when you go for poop. Because as your rectum your poop is squeezing down, it's encouraging the flow of the cervical fluid also to descend into the vagina.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good time to do it. After you go pee. And the key is to do it at different times throughout the day. Like you don't want to do 3 checks in the morning, because cervical fluid can start at any time during the day, and it takes time, a little bit of time, to descend into the vagina. Okay? Yes.
So maybe you're going to talk more about this, but it looks like there's 3 kind of distinct types or textures: the light green, the middle green, the dark green. And the light green and the dark green look kind of similar, like the egg white and the creamy lotiony paste, like
Yeah.
creamy lotiony and egg white don't seem that different to me.
Okay.
But is it that it starts out this way and then it becomes watery and then it becomes egg white,
Okay.
or
Well.
milky and egg white and lotiony?
Yeah. Well,
Don't
that's
seem
why
that
we're
different.
gonna.
Okay.
So the thing is, what this is sort of showing is that there are like a million ways to describe it. The main point is that if you have it, it's fertile. It's potentially fertile. It's
Just
likely
anywhere in that range.
moving towards more fertile, more wet.
Uh-huh.
So the point is to get words that make sense to you.
Okay.
And many women do experience a pattern of it being sort of drier, tacky, to becoming more wet, more slippery, more watery. Okay. Yes. Good.
I'm really tired.
I'm really tired too. How about, oh my god, it's late.
What time is it?
8:53. Damn. You want to spend a few minutes just touching all these gooey things.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
Should we do a part 2?
yeah, I think we might need to. If that would be okay with you guys, because this is so good to be like, yeah, you can't go over this really quickly. And I probably could get more succinct in how I teach it as well. But, yeah, I think it'd be good to at least go over this, and then I can send you guys home with charts, and you can start experimenting, and a lot of this is gonna make more sense once you start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So just to be clear, the things that we're charting are our temperature
Yep.
and our texture.
Cervical fluid. Uh-huh. Yeah, and the position of your cervix, if you want. That's an optional one, not everyone.
Yeah, I've
likes to
never
do it.
been able to feel. I've only tried a few times, but I've never been able to reach it.
Okay, well, that would be the thing we would talk about next after this, so we'll get there, but
Okay.
you don't have to do that. It's just something that usually confirms what you're seeing elsewhere. Okay, so let's get onto the ground because we
Go!
can change our posiciones. Okay, everybody take one of these. And let's see how all this, I don't even remember what I used for all these things now.
I like your story.
I really don't. Okay. So all of these things are not non-toxic-ish, especially if you wipe them off. Okay. So let's start out with, so at the beginning of the cycle, for many women, they have this kind of infertile mucus, and this stays in the cervix as a plug, and you're not going to feel it at your vagina, at the opening of your vagina, okay? So once estrogens start rising and it starts triggering the production of cervical fluid, first comes out, oh boy, don't eat any of this kitty titty. It can be, the patterns can be slightly different for different women, but let's just take let's take a little feel of that. So you're gonna stick your finger in it like and pretend as if that's your vulva. Just a little bit, yep. And first thing you're gonna do is, without looking at it, rub it between your fingers. And what does it feel like? And kind of do this with your fingers.
Very sticky.
Feels like glue.
Feels like glue.
Hey! Imagine what that would feel like in your pubes.
Ew.
Super glue. That's like what Ruthie was talking about. Okay, so then that's the feeling is sort of sticky-ish. And then we look at it. And, okay, well, your cervical fluid,
I made mine into a
you've
ball
made
too
yours.
much.
All right, well, you get the idea that it's white-ish. When you bring your fingers apart, it kind of breaks. It's sticky. So you could write that this is sticky, white. Okay, something. It's potentially fertile because it's coming out of your cervix, coming out of your. Okay, this is water. If you guys. Maybe we can make your own baby wipe here. Sorry. Baby wipe. Okay, so that would be a sticky or a tacky maybe. Let's feel this one.
Oh, that's a big old blob.
Big old blob. How does it feel?
Big old blob. Creamy.
Very creamy.
Like mayonnaise.
Ooh.
Or lotion.
Or lotion.
Lotion, you could call this maybe lotion-y.
Much better than lotion.
Or mayonnaise. I mean, I've never seen somebody put mayonnaise on a thing, but you could write that mayonnaise-y. Smooth, right. So if you were to feel this and you were to wipe your perineum, it might actually glide over, right? It might feel a little bit more smooth wiping. Okay, so now if you were to look at it, we did mostly rub it away, but, you know, it breaks apart, but it's smooth and white, and all those things are great descriptive words. Okay. Lotion-y. Lotion-ish.
So basically you want to note
Color.
color, texture,
Consistency.
and what happens when you.
Yeah. When you stretch it apart. Okay, so let's try this one.
Like lotiony but thick.
Thicker.
Thicker lotiony.
Okay.
Smooth.
And when you, this actually looks a lot like, when you break it apart, this looks a lot like what cervical fluid might do at the beginning. Like it, see how it makes those tiny little peaks?
Uh-huh.
But they're small and it breaks. So sort of a
Peaks.
peak. Yeah, little small peaks. Okay, so that one you could call, maybe you also would call that lotiony or thick or white, those kinds of things. Okay, so now we are getting
Oh
into.
my God, you're sticky.
Baby wipe?
I know, I actually meant to bring baby wipes, but I didn't have any. So now we're coming into, we're getting closer to ovulation. And we might have, so these sort of things, these white, sticky, tacky, creamy, lotiony, these are all white and this texture because the cervical fluid is mixing with the vaginal cell slough. It's like, yeah, there's a little cervical fluid, it's coming out, we're noticing it, it's mixed, it's white, and then as we get closer to ovulation, there becomes more, usually more cervical fluid, and it becomes clearer and wetter. And so at first, it might kind of dip in that area. Yeah. Okay, so feel how this feels.
Smooth.
Smooth. Okay.
Smooth.
Smooth.
But like thin.
Thinner.
Thin.
A little bit thinner. And then, maybe we didn't get a good. You might start noticing, oh, it starts to be getting a little bit
Ooh.
goopier, but it's still got some white. It's cloudy. You might call that
Cloudy.
cloudy, a little bit of stretch, kind of goopy. And then, so when you were talking about Heather sometimes feeling that gush, let's try this one. This might be part of what, this is a little gritty, but you probably won't feel grit. But the idea is more the wetness of it, and that it's, how would you describe that?
I don't know.
Milky, maybe?
Milky?
I probably should have used more like real milk. This is flour and it didn't quite, gluten-free flour at that, it didn't quite work. But the idea is it's cloudy, but it's getting wetter.
Uh-huh.
Like it's less of that creamy
Less
stuff
creamy.
and more, okay.
More watery.
Then we've got, this you might, well, let's just feel it. And imagine how this would feel wiping over your perineum as well.
Smooth, a little bit slimy.
Very slick.
Slick, yes.
It's like smooth. It's not quite. It's like watery, but with a weight.
Yes.
There's a little bit more of a
A little bit more of a stretch, yep.
stretch.
And it's slick and it's clear.
So it's
So this would be, yeah, slick. You've got a little bit stretchy, clear.
trying to figure out what they are.
This is like lube.
I'm like, I know this smell. What is it?
Okay, so this next one we're gonna do, bam, but I'm not gonna give it a curve. Okay, so this is the one that you've probably heard about. Egg white. Okay, so come get a little fingerful, either from, I think you just dip. Yeah. Okay, so how does that feel?
Well, mine feels pretty watery.
Yeah, mine feels watery as well.
I don't think we've got the sticky part, but I know
but
what you
mine's
mean.
pretty stretchy.
But see, look at that, see?
Pretty stretchy.
Stretchy, and it
Stretchy.
almost like, sometimes you can get almost like a
Glob.
lump,
Yeah.
a glob, like,
Mhm.
and it may be streaked with a little bit of white, but likely it's going to get clearer the closer you get to ovulation. And what that's doing is it's making the vagina more alkaline. It's potentially nourishing any sperm that's in there. It's a sign of high fertility.
So
Yes.
on your cervix website,
Yes.
you have this picture of you doing this, and it's just thick
Yeah.
in a way that I didn't know was possible, which
Well,
makes me wonder if
so what's cool, what I like about this is, okay, every woman is gonna have a slightly different pattern of this. You might not get tacky. You might just go straight to milky and then egg white. You might, so every woman's gonna be a little bit different, so you're just gonna write what you have. You can write how much it stretches if you have a stretch, like an inch or 2 inches or, that thing that you're talking about is almost gloppy, like it's something I get, but a lot of women don't get it. And it doesn't mean that I'm normal and you're not at all.
Right.
So let me just show you these. This is hopefully going to synthesize things a little bit, making the abstract a little bit more clear.
Okay, yeah.
So what we've just, let's skip down to the color and consistency. So, okay, so you're bleeding. We know what that looks like: red, bright red, brown. Like I said, the things that come out might be gelatinous-y or chunky a little bit, or clotty, or just clear or plain blood. And then on days when you're spotting, the sort of light blood, I don't know if I guess you would call it that, might be a little bit watery or slick. And then, so no cervical fluid and dry. So that's before we get to this. This is the cervical fluid, the infertile fluid that's in the, stays in the cervix as a plug. You're not going to be observing really anything at your yoni at the opening. It might be a little damp, but there's nothing to finger test. That's how we did that, okay?
Mhm.
If you were to taste that, you would probably taste, I really think it's cool, it's kind of acidic, actually kind of bitter, like wow. And then as you wipe yourself, it's halting, like it's dry, there's nothing there. And then, you know, the vulva sensation is like checking in throughout the day, noticing, and likely that will be dry. And so, as soon as you notice anything in a change in your vulva sensation, a change of the way the toilet paper is gliding, something that you're observing in your when you do your finger checks, that's called the point of change, and that means that you've begun to be fertile. And so we've talked about, so what you were talking about here, I'm trying to figure out how to communicate this most clearly, but like there's not really 3 different categories. Essentially, any cervical fluid before confirmed ovulation is potentially fertile. It just gets more fertile the closer it gets to ovulation because like it becomes more and more able to nourish sperm, and the sperm are likely to live, like they're less likely to live 5 days and more likely to live 1 day, you know. And so here I think we've pretty much gone over this. These are the qualities of sort of these first 3: sticky, tacky, creamy, lotiony. The taste can start to change and become neutral or almost sweet, and then because there is something there, when you wipe, it may be smoother. And then as you become very fertile, you get more of these clear, wet, lubricative, slippery, snotty, like snot in the shower, you know, like it's lube-like, and you might notice in your underwear like a round patch, whereas before you might see
More pasty.
pasty things, or like
Right.
streaks, but not like the water content. And so those are the reason we distinguish them between fertile and very fertile is really to see the patterns that emerge, and that will give us a clue as to our hormonal health. We would ideally like to see that you have some fertile, and then you do get this very fertile, these stretchy, clear, egg white, that there are at least 1 or 2 days of that indicates, oh yeah, your hormones are flowing well. And then after ovulation, which you'll confirm with your basal body temperature, there may be something, so you might notice nothing, like dry like it was before. Or you might notice what we call luteal mucus, which is usually just a little bit yellowier, like it might be kind of like this, but it's yellowier, like might be sticky or whatever, but you've confirmed ovulation, boink. So you know it's luteal mucus.
What is BIP?
So this is called it's an acronym for basic and fertile pattern, and that is when somebody doesn't ever have days that are dry. Like they just always have something, and that can happen if you've got be a hormonal imbalance. It can be if you had damage to your cervical crypts, like sometimes like a colonization they do for HPV, or if there's inflammation in the cervix, or sometimes after birth control, women just have like a constant something. It's not a constant egg white, but it's like maybe this all the time. They have it before and after, and that would be something that we would find out once you've charted for a while.
Really late.
Right now,
For you to explain how to chart? What?
Well, it's not that much explaining to do, really, because you're gonna have this. You've got your thingy, and the idea is that. Here, let's all stand together so that we can get the same chart. So the cycle day 1 is the first day of your bleeding. I don't know why, I'm really sorry that these Xeroxed funny. There should be lines.
Do you want to email us a copy of it?
Yes, I can do that. And we
But
do for now, just so you can see it. So
it's chart. Oh,
yes.
I have to wait till then.
well, you don't, because if you know, didn't you tell me you started on the 23rd?
Yes.
So you could write the date, 23rd, January 23rd, and so the week, and you could.
Can I just sort of start tracking
Sure.
my
Whenever.
shit?
Yeah. And then, so the weekday, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever day of the week you started on. We're going to ignore the heart for now, and ignore the fertile phase. And so if you look at this, the code, you look at this one at the same time. The code is this symbol. I should write code and not symbol, but it's just a way to shorthand note where you are, what you're having on here.
Is this your jacket?
Oh yeah, thank you. Katie, no thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So it's going to be like a visual way of showing what's going on. So if you have your period and you're having heavy bleeding, you do 3 stars. And then the secretions description is where you would write one of these words. Red, bloody, super high flow, whatever. And then you go along during the days. And then if you have nothing, or if you're dry like that, you do the slash. And once you notice any change in the way it feels, and your sensation in the way it wipes, or what you find on your hand, you start writing CF in the code. And then you describe what you see. And then when you get to that very fertile, so that was those clear, slippery, egg white ones, you circle the CF. And we're going to leave it at that. You just ignore the CF with the X for now. And then the luteal mucus would be after you ovulate. So here, yes.
So I write down the 24th, and then I get to wherever I am now, and
Yes.
then I start.
Yes.
Okay.
And so for temperatures, this is sort of like, you kind of have to turn it this way to do the temperatures. But this says 96 degrees. You see that?
Uh-huh.
96. And then 96.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and then it's 97 degrees.
Uh-huh.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 98 degrees.
So you would like circle 97 and then which number in there?
Yeah, let me show you a sort of completed chart so you can have a sense of that.
Okay.
But I could start with a regular old fever thermometer until I get a basal one.
Sure, if you want the non-beeper. So like just to get a quick look-see, this is what a complete chart might look like. We didn't go over a couple of these things yet, but like, okay, so you do the code. So your first day, you're bleeding, heavy, medium, light. S is the spotting. So you've been taking your temperature. The first day she was 97.1. Second day, 97.3. Got it? And then here she didn't have any any cervical fluids, the slash. And then here, day 10, started to have something, sticky pubes, tacky. This triangle means change, so like change from before, there was nothing here. Now she has something. And then as she gets, it's lotiony, then it starts getting egg white and slippery, lubricative. So she circles the CF, because that's the more fertile, the very fertile kinds of CF. And then here, we're going to go over later like how to exactly measure this. But if you were to look at this, can you sort of see how these are lower temperatures and these are higher?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to go over like how you would draw the line to know before and after ovulation. But just as a sense, like where does it go up?
Where does it go up?
Yeah.
Here?
Uh-huh. On the 6, right?
Uh-huh.
You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, I ovulated probably yesterday, because it's up, and that stays up. And for some women this is more extreme, like they go up and it's up much higher, but I just sort of wanted to show you it can be subtle.
Mm-hmm.
So do you understand just these codes and what you're tracking and how to track it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, that was awesome. And I'm excited about your homework, which is
Chart.
chart. Check your
Temperature
temperature every
and
day and cervical fluid. Temperature first thing in the morning, cervical fluid at least
three
three
times
times a day. So there's just going to be something you start. See, okay, maybe I do it in the morning, every time I take a poop, remember, maybe before bed, like get in some rhythm that works for you. So this is the experimental phase where you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And thank you, and we'll have to
you.
schedule another time to finish all the details and figure out, so we've basically gone over what might be happening. You're gonna start charting what's happening for you, and then I'm gonna give you some rules as to know when you can have sex and when you can't have sex based on when you're fertile.
Okay.
That
Or
would be
when he
next
can come
class.
inside you and when he can.
Really, that's, yes, exactly.